Amen, church. If you don't mind, turn over to the book of John. John chapter number 1. Got a couple verses I'll be reading from over in there. John 1. I'm going to be, once again, I'm putting my phone out here and a little timer just to make sure I don't go for too long. John chapter number 1. Let's begin reading here in verse number 10. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. Verse 11, he came unto his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. Let's go and read verse number 13. Which were born not of blood, nor of the will of flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. So here, where I first started reading verse number 10, 10. He was in the world, and the world was made by him. Hey, we're reminded of who our Creator is. We're reminded, hey, that God's the one who created us all. He's our Creator. He made everything that we see, everything that we know of. Hey, it's all because of God, because He made it. But we see that there's an issue at the end of verse number 10. And the world knew Him not. And I'm glad that when God made this world, when He created Adam and Eve, He didn't just make us, put us to the side, go do His own thing and say, I'll just occasionally check in on this to see how they do on their own. No, I'm glad God wanted a relationship with His creation. That's what I'm going to be talking about today, a relationship with His creation. But like I said, there's an issue. The world did not know Him. And hey, we know what who verse number 11 is talking about. He came unto His own, and His own received Him not. When Jesus came, He came, but hey, not everyone accepted Him. Hey, His own people did not fully accept Him. There were some that did, and there were many that didn't. But hey, verse number 12, by as many as received Him, to them gave He power to become the sons of God. Hey, Jesus wanted such a relationship with His people, but He didn't make them have the relationship with Him back. He's a respecter of persons. Hey, if someone says, I don't want a relationship with God, hey, God will convict somebody, but if that person keeps pushing away, God's going to say, all right, you don't want a relationship with me? That's fine. He ain't going to force you to serve. That ain't what God wants. God wants us to serve Him, to seek out a relationship with Him. Like I said, God came to this world. He wanted a relationship with His creation. God seeked that out. But hey, in our own lives, we're going to have to do the same. And that's a two-way street. We're going to have to seek a relationship with God. You're not going to be able to do whatever you want. You're not going to be able to live your life how you want and have that relationship. You got to put other things to the side. Say, I'm going to focus on how close I am with God. You can get as close as you want. Hey, to become a son, power to become the sons of God, to be adopted into that family. And hey, whenever you adopt somebody, I've got family that I love. I've got family it's really hard to love. I'm sure many of us in here have that too. Family that aren't super close. Family that just seems like they don't care about stabbing you in the back. But hey, I'm glad I got some friends that are closer than some of that family. I got some friends, hey, I know I can go to that won't stab me in the back. And it's about, if you want a relationship, if you want a good relationship with somebody, hey, you can make it. I'm glad when I got adopted, when I got born again into this family, God chose. He said, you know what? You weren't initially, you're born of sin. You're a sinful creature. But accept me and I will take you. You can become my son. I got adopted into His family. He wanted to love me. And amen, I want to love Him. And I was thinking, the other day I was thinking, there's actually maybe a week and a half ago, I saw a post on Facebook from an old friend from high school. And me and him, we were really good friends. He was one of these friends I knew that, hey, no matter what the time, no matter the place, I could call him up and he would be there to help me in a heartbeat. But I ain't seen him in 4 years, since high school ended. And when I first saw that, my first thought was, man, me and him are good friends. But then I'm like, you know what? I ain't talked to him. I ain't seen him. How good of friends are we? And I hate to see Christians that don't really spend much time with God, and Christians that don't spend time in His Word or in church that say, yeah, I've got a relationship with God. Really? How long has it been since you talked to Him? How long has it been since you pursued that relationship? I'm not married, but I imagine with the spouse, amen, how that relationship's going to be if you hardly ever talk to her, if the only time you were to talk to her or him is when you need something. How close of a relationship is that going to be? What kind of relationship do you have with God? Hey, I think it'll all do us good. Hey, even if we think we're fine, to look at our lives and say, hey, am I pursuing this relationship with God that He wants with me? Because like I say, if you just keep pushing aside, you're not going to live how you want and be a good friend to God. And so I just hope that we all think about that thing. Hey, He wanted to be with us. He loves us. He wants to be in our lives. Do we want Him a part of our lives? Hey, it's a two-way street. Amen. That's kind of all I got this morning. Birthdays and anniversaries this past week. Amen. Y'all made me dismiss the Sunday school.
Morning, gentlemen. Preacher texted me at noon yesterday before I went to the park. Accurate, yeah. Yeah, plenty of time. Really, it was. I mean, I got this same lesson I taught in college class when he was gone. Added a little to it, which I didn't even finish it then either. So. But if you want to go ahead and turn to Genesis chapter 37, we're pretty much going to just we're not going to jump around. We're just going to be in Genesis. And we're going to kind of go over Joseph's life. Now, there's a lot of ways you could teach about Joseph. And I might hit on a couple of different things. But kind of my outline today, or title, if you will, is A Man with a Dream from God. So I'm going to deal with Joseph and his dream and kind of how that worked in his life. I tried to be like preacher, put all the same letters. So I got a man with a dream from God, a dream for God, a dream found by God, and a dream foretold by God, and then a dream not forgotten by God. So I was thinking here, though, before I even start teaching, I'm not just going to teach it from Joseph's point as if we're all Joseph. I was thinking about this, which almost made me think about another lesson that might come up in the future about identity crisis. I thought that's a good title, but nowadays in America, you can identify as a dog, a cat. A man can identify as a woman can identify as a man. What does that really mean? Your actions speak louder than words. No matter what you identify as, if you don't really see the real issue in the matter, it's kind of like our country. It will never be fixed. People will never have their lives right until they realize the root of the issue. Right. You can't identify and believe this other thing and ever fix the issue because you're not identifying with the issue. Right. And I was thinking about that. Lot, you can look at that with Christians. Lot was basically a Sodom and Gomorrahite. He identified as the world, but what was he? He wasn't the world. The Bible says he vexed his righteous soul. See, us as Christians, us as sheep, can identify as wolves and still be a sheep. But he couldn't get right as long as he was identifying with that crowd until God got him out of it. So I was thinking about that. So just thinking about that, I was like, I think I should work that. Maybe one day Ross ain't here, I'll do that one. But so just thinking about that, what do we identify as? Dealing with Joseph here, are we Joseph, or are we one of his brothers, right? Because we're not always going to be humanistic in the way we think. We always think we're the hero of the story, in a sense. That's not always the case. Someone else could have a dream, and we could be pulling them down with their dream. And the whole time thinking, well, Joseph, no, you're Reuben. So if we just get on to that, if we start at Genesis chapter 37, and we'll start reading here, and just as we go through, I'll hit the points I have. So the first point is that he had a dream. So in verse 1, and Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. I kind of like that how, most of the time the Bible says these are generations, start naming off all these names, but it just starts telling the story of Joseph. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. So just seeing that at the very beginning of this, we see that obviously Joseph is he's like a reporter for his father, right? Because we'll notice that he sends him off later to go see what his brother's doing. So we kind of can tell here this ain't the first time. So Joseph's job, his father's not even giving him that much work to do in the sense of plowing or anything, since he loved him so much. He's like, you just go tell me what they're doing. You be my manager. You come tell me. Well, that's going to make him mad. Have you ever seen that with favoritism with somebody, especially even if it's your family, and then you got to do all the work and someone else is not? That brings some grudges. So if we look at verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. I was thinking about that. If I see Zeke coming here in a coat of many colors one day, we, we in your old age. But in verse 4, and when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. That's pretty bad, though, when you think about it. You ever had anybody doing really great, like all these blessings hitting them, and you're not doing so well, and you can't? We should not let that happen in our lives. That you can't speak peaceably. That you can't like be fake and smile and all, but you can't say anything nice. You know, we don't want that to come into our lives. We don't want to have grudges. You'll see how their lives ended up. And I was just thinking about that. You couldn't speak peaceably. Couldn't say, "Hey, how are you?" or like, "Oh, that's a great job." Nope, never said it. Couldn't speak peaceably to him. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, "Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed." And he had to be able to see the looks on their face. Hey, listen to this. "For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood around about and made abstinence to my sheaf. And his brethren said to him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words." So they're hating him even more. And it didn't just say dream, it said dreams. He was a dreamer. Joseph was a man that was a dreamer, but he was given dreams by God. So as we look through his life, you notice that he holds to his dreams. If you look at verse 8, and his brethren said to him, verse 9, and he dreamed yet another dream, and told it to his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made abstinence to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren. And his father rebuked him, and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow ourselves to thee to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the saying. And his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. So we see so far, even his father rebuked him, but he observed the saying. He's like, there might be something to that. Because Joseph, he wasn't, as we know in the Bible, it doesn't really record his sin. We know he sinned because he's a man, but, he was a goodly person. He was upright. And when he said his dreams, it's a dream, so he probably had other dreams come true already. But we know that God gave him a dream. These dreams here that throughout his life he held on to, no matter what hard troubles came. So it made me think here too. Proverbs 29:18 says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish, but he that keepeth the law, happy is he." And you can stay with that on Joseph's life. He had a vision, he had a dream his whole life. So no matter what bad things happened in his life, he still followed the law. As we go through his life here, we know that he didn't sin against God even when he had hard times. But he had a vision the whole time. If he didn't have those dreams, if he didn't have those visions, what would have happened to him? You never know. I think Ross mentioned it before, teaching, preachers preach, what's your 5-year plan spiritually? We all have goals physically. Makes you think about, we should think about those things. Because if we don't have a vision, we could just end up perishing. We could be one of those that fall, that no longer go to church, all because it was just stuck in the present, which I find myself living in the past and the present a lot. So I'm teaching myself here. So to his father. So if we look here at verse 13, and Israel said unto Joseph, Do thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said unto him, Here am I. And he said, so we notice here that Joseph was there when his father needed him. I'm not really teaching on like the similarities between him and Jesus, but we might hit a couple as we go. And in verse 14, and he said to him, Go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem, and a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field, and the man asked him, saying, What seekest thou? And he said, I seek my brethren, tell thee, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. And the man said, They are departed hence, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went to his brethren and found him in Dothan. And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. So we say, well, how did they notice him from far off? Well, he still had that coat of many colors on. I was also thinking of this. The guy that found him in the field, he probably saw a guy wandering, but he's like, probably didn't think nothing of it, but he saw him in color. He's like, why is that guy of many colors? He probably should be looks like he belongs in a palace or something. I need to go find out. I'm just curious, what is this guy doing out here? right? So we notice this, just looking at this, we know that if we have the blessings of God and do God's will, people are going to notice us. He stood out. I mean, if he didn't have that coat of many colors on, his brother wouldn't have seen him from afar off and known who it was, I'm sure. I mean, wearing robes back in that day and the staff, he probably just looked like anybody else. You know, a guy with a beard down there. But we know that he had a coat of many colors. He stood out. So he was doing, thinking of that, he was doing the will of God, and he had blessings on his life, and people could notice some blessings. But we also notice here that the blessings for those that hated him didn't help him, right? Because of the blessing, they saw him and they spotted him, and they already had time to communicate and talk about their plan. So you got to think, even with the blessings, there's going to be turmoil, there's going to be strife, there's going to be envy of other people. But that shouldn't stop us from wanting the blessings of God, wanting to do right. And verse 19, and they said one to another, behold, this dreamer cometh. So he was already known by his dreams, of living his vision, his dreams. He didn't just say it one time, it was done. How many of us forget our dreams? You know, you ever have dreams, aspire to be something, and you just forget them? You know, I look at the word dream. One of the meanings is a series of thoughts, images, or emotions occurring during sleep. But another definition of dream is a dream, a cherished aspiration, ambition, or ideal. So he had some ambitions. He had some ideals for God. And what verse we at? Oh yeah, verse 20. So, you know, verse 19, and they said one to another, behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit. And we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. And it was right in the verse earlier, they were envious. They were so envious of his dreams. They wanted his dreams. His dreams weren't their dreams to have. That's why I said we got to watch ourselves. If someone else has a great dream, we don't need to be like the brothers here. Just because they had a great dream, you want their dream. Your dream might be something small, and they have this great dream. You don't want to become envious of that. And in verse 21, and Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands, to deliver him to his father again. And it came to pass, when Joseph was coming to his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him. And they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead, with their camels bringing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brethren, what profited if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. Then there passed by Midianites merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. And Reuben returned into the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his clothes. And he returned unto his brethren, and said, this child is not, and I, whither shall I go? And they took Joseph's coat, and killed a kid of goats, and dipped it in the coat of blood. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father, and said, this we have found now. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no. And he knew it, and said, it is my son's coat, and evil beasts hath devoured him. Joseph was without doubt rent in pieces. And Jacob rent his clothes, and put sackcloth upon his loins, and mourned for his son many days. And all of his sons and all of his daughters rose up to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted, and he said, for I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning. This his father wept for him. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt, and to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's, and the captain of the guard. So we notice toward the end of the chapter that Joseph was thrown into the pit. I always thought it was interesting. You know, Reuben, I always thought maybe Reuben wasn't so bad. Because Reuben wanted, but he had his own goals, right? Reuben's like, okay, let's put him in the pit, and I'm going to sneak back and get him. I'm going to be the favorite. You know, that's probably what he's thinking. Why wouldn't he just stand for him then and just say, no, not doing this, Joseph, you go on home. No, that wasn't his plan. His plan was he didn't want them to hate him, but he's like, you know what? I could really get in good here. You know, I'm the firstborn. I can show father that I can take care of Joseph. I saved him from his brothers. All right, that's the plan. And he leaves, right? And thinks, okay, they're going to do it. But then Judah's, he's like, well, you know, we can sell and make some money. So he's selling this, and then Reuben's like, where am I going to go? In other words, I can't go back to my father like this. Because we'll see in the future, whenever, not to get ahead of myself, whenever Jacob wants to send him, bring Benjamin back, He wouldn't let Reuben do it. When Reuben said all this stuff, kill my 2 sons, he wouldn't let him do it because he'd already broke his trust. So he had, eventually Judah lets him, but not to get ahead of ourselves. But and I also noticed this, that his coat of many colors was stripped off. So Joseph's following his dreams, right? And just because he's following his dream was never to actually have the coat of many colors, was it? It was for them to bow down for what God had in his plan. So he had a blessing there. But knowing us, if we had a great blessing that was stripped from us, what would we do? I mean, he was just stripped, he threw in a pit, and sold into slavery. I'd be like, well, that dream's over. Just forget about it. I mean, let's be honest. I just forget about the dream. Like, well, this is a dream I had when I was a kid. I just forget about it. But Joseph didn't do it. We can notice this here. He'll bring it up time and again. But so we got to keep, when reading through this, I think, Joseph is a perfect example of what we should do and what we should be. Like I said, sometimes we fall short. Sometimes we might be the one, we might be the Reuben or the Judah, doing it for our own gain. Hopefully we're not the brother that just wants to kill him. And you're you're really going too far then. And then if we go ahead in chapter 38, so we notice that one blessing was stripped off. And so let's see what happens to now. And it says, and it came to pass at that time that Judah went, chapter 39. 38 is just about Judah's little excursion. We can kind of see about how Judah is there, but for sake of time, we'll just go to chapter 29. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which he had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not all he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. So just looking at this part, I wrote down this, as much of a blessing Joseph brought to this household, he had to be a blessing back home. And I guarantee after they got rid of him, maybe they weren't as smart as him, or just God, blessed them, not just as smart, just God blessed them. Maybe their work got harder, I'm sure. I'm sure they probably thought after this, you know what? Joseph had some great ideas. That dreamer had some good ideas. How would Joseph do this? I don't know. So when you think about it, sometimes other people's blessings bless you and you don't even realize it. And then it's too late whenever you get envious. You let that envy and that hatred or bitterness spring up in your life. Your whole life you might be, I don't think anybody else have it, but we need to watch out for it. You might be thinking bad things, all this person, that, and the whole time they were probably blessed you didn't even know it. Or they could have blessed you and you put them out of your life. Right? So just looking here, but this man, he saw, he's like, well, he gave everything into Joseph's hand. See here. And in verse 7, it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wanted not what is with me in the house, and he had committed all that he had to my hand. There's none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day, they hearkened not to her to lie by her or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went to the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. Which you just mentioned that the other day, preacher. If he knew there was nobody in there, then don't go in there. But in verse 12, and she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. And it came to pass when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house and spake unto him, saying, see he had brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, the Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in to me to mock me. And it came to pass that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, and his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, and a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand. Behold, the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it prosper. So even in the prison, he was prospering. But if you notice here so far, anything left into Joseph's hand, people trusted him wholeheartedly. They didn't know what was going on with it. And it's just a picture of Christ. If we give Christ everything, he will never steer you wrong. It says here Joseph was a goodly person. And we know Christ is a goodly person. But I notice here, on this dreamer, this is the second time he had his garment stripped from him. Right? This is the second time he left. You got to think it kind of brought up some memories when he ran out of her hand and she had that garment in her hand. That's the second time. I think, I've had these great blessings from God, and God's been great to me, and now I'm in the prison. This is the second time that I've been stripped from not just his garment, but it's signifying that all his status, everything he had was stripped from him, and now he's in the prison. Now, me, personally, I'd probably be pretty mad. I mean, just being honest. I mean, we get angry. I mean, she lied on me after all that. And there's another thing I was thinking. Sin isn't over just one time you beat it. She did it day by day. So even if she hadn't grabbed him then, if he hadn't went in the house, a year from then, she's still been going day by day, years and years. It's like, I like this status, but I could do it without the nagging wife, right? So I thought that earlier. But I mean, seriously though, I mean, but he never gave in to her. And then when she had his garment, he just ran. Just touching. He probably could actually just push her away or nothing, but no, he just ran as fast as he could. He didn't want to be tempted. And then she did that great lying on him and everything, and then he's thrown into the prison. And I guarantee you this, just like I said earlier, how their lives are harder. His brothers, after he threw in the prison, he's like, what do I have? Where's some books that Joseph would keep up? If you notice the blessings he brought to everyone's life, but when they got envious or when they believed lies on him and threw him out, they were missing a blessing. It's just like a story. It's just such a great picture of Christ. If we leave Christ out, how many blessings we miss out on. How many great things. How much harder is life without Christ. How much harder were their lives without Joseph. I never really thought about that before, but he had to catch up on all that work. I have no idea what I have. What are you doing today? And what Joseph said, okay. You remember what Joseph told you to do? That's what it was. He just come, eat his bread. And he said when he came home, he was out golfing or something. He came home. And then when his wife told him, he wasn't working in the fields or nothing. He was having a good time. They said, how are you doing this week? I asked Joseph. Things are doing good. So we notice here, that's why I'm saying, I'm kind of teaching this on, are we Potiphar? Or are we Joseph in our lives? Do we have the dream? Or, it's not always going to be us with the dream, the great dream, There's other people in his life that didn't have those kind of dreams, but it seems like everybody was envious of him as you go along. Okay, and then in chapter 41, let's see. But just mentioning the things we were just talking about with his wife and lying on him, that part was a dream for God, because he had a dream from God originally, but he still held on to his dream for God. He had a purpose to serve God. And then now we turn to, let's see here. Yeah, Genesis chapter 40. And we'll see a dream found by God. In other words, because of his dreams, he was able, and in him being right with God and not getting mad in all these situations, he was able to tell others their dreams. So these others, had they not told him the dream, had they not listened to him, he couldn't help them. So how much is that like a picture of Christ? If we don't come to him, how can he help you? But also here, verse 1, and it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard into the prison, but the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with him, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of the Lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? Well, here's one thing I was thinking. If we're in Joseph's shoes and we have a dream for God and we're following God and all these bad things have happened, but he still cared about these other two guys that were in prison. How many times do we get caught up on our own things? And especially us as men too, reading the emotions of your wife's stuff. Just think about it. How many times do we get caught up in our own things that we don't see the afflictions of others? Right? And had he not seen these afflictions of these others to ask him to start with, not just them telling him, but if he hadn't even asked them, then he'd have not ended up getting out of prison later. The things would have came to pass. They were coming to pass. He just interpreted it. In 3 days, the butler was back. If he had never told the butler wouldn't have known about him. So he didn't miss out on a blessing, just having a grudge about what happened to him. He was still looking at these. And it says in verse 8, And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them, I pray you. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph, and said to him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said to him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head and restore thee into thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former manner when thou wast his butler. And he even says right here, But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention unto me, unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there was of all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days, yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. And it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted of them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forget him. So I'd be pretty down in the dumps now. So you done had your raiment stripped twice, you're in the prison, and you're watching another guy live his dream, right? God gave him a dream a long time ago, and then he got to interpret another person's dream and partake in it, but the other person forgot about him. Right. So how much bitter would we be? You ever help somebody out and actually really help them out or something, and then they never mention you, it was all them that did it? So, if I was Joseph, I'd be pretty upset then. And just looking here, and I thought about this too, just a side thing, that Pharaoh celebrated his birthday. I was thinking about that. I guess we've been celebrating our birthdays for a long time. He made a big feast over it. I know, this is just a little rabbit. a really small rabbit. But looking at these verses here, and the baker's like, oh man, he had a great dream. He had a great interpretation. I want to know my dream. So he tells his dream. He doesn't tell him, remember me, when you're being hanged. I just thought that's pretty bad, that hear that great dream and then find out you got a terrible dream. But looking here, so this is a dream found out by God. I really thought about that though. We need to think about that. If something's good to happen to someone else, don't be, because in that case Joseph had the choice of, well, do I want to be envious of his dream? He was restored. And he's like, well, God, I had this dream you had a long time ago. So we go ahead and go forward. Let's see what time it is. In chapter 41, and it came to pass at the end of 2 full years, so it's been 2 whole years since that happened, that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kind of fat flesh, And they fed in a meadow, and behold, 7 other kind came up about them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kind upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kind did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kind. So Pharaoh woke, and he slept and dreamed another dream. And, well, just for the sake of time, we'll skip through it. But we know about it's basically a similar dream. And then in verse 9, at verse 8, and it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. So we notice here, it really reminds you of Daniel, doesn't it? Because no one could do it but Daniel in his day. Except Pharaoh didn't threaten to kill everybody, just because they couldn't. Then in verse 9, then spake the chief butler to Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Been 2 years, and oh yeah, that's right. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants, and put me in ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man, a Hebrew servant, to the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams, to each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was, me he restored unto mine offers, and him he hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself, and changed his raiment, and came into Pharaoh. So that's the one we shaved before we do an interview, right? But looking at this verse, we know this is the first time he changed his raiment, but it wasn't stripped from him. This is changed upward. He's like, oh, things are looking up. Every time he's had his raiment stripped from him, they're like, you need to change your raiment. Oh, well, what's happening this time? You put sackcloth on me or something? No, they said, change your raiment. You got to go meet the Pharaoh. And verse 15, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. So we notice here that just like a picture of Christ and God, and Joseph and the Pharaoh, he didn't try to take his own glory here. So we got to notice that. Never fail to give God the glory when God gives you a blessing in your life. Because other here, he may not give you another one. But here he told him, he could have said, I know it, Pharaoh, just so that, to make sure that Pharaoh, doesn't put him back in prison. But if he just said, well, God knows it, then, anybody could pray to God and get it right. But no, he didn't care. He was doing the truth. Just like it said, like the verse, where there is no vision, the people perish. But he that keepeth the law, happy is he. So when you have a vision of what God gave you, the whole time, he never wavered on keeping the law. If he didn't have that vision, I was thinking about this all through these verses, everything he did was to honor God and was to do right, to serve his God. He said he wouldn't lie with Potiphar's wife, not to sin against Potiphar, but to sin against God. So this whole time, he wouldn't break the law. But why? What was the end goal? Because he knew Christ. He was a Christian in a sense. He knew God. God gave him a dream, and he didn't let up. He never wavered on that dream. Like I said, we would waver sometimes, but he never wavered on it, because you could tell. You say, well, how do you know he didn't waver on it? The Bible doesn't actually say he was always thinking about it. Well, you could tell by his actions, because he still, just like that verse, if there was no vision, he wouldn't have did the law, but he that keepeth the law, happy is he. So we know he had a vision. He was keeping the law of God. What verse was that? Oh yeah, verse. Well, we know that Pharaoh basically tells him to dream over again. So if we look through these verses here, he's telling them to dream all the way through verse 25. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good kind of 7 years, and the 7 good years are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7th then an ill-favored kind, and came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty years blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showed it to Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and seek him over the land of Egypt. And let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the fifth part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years, and let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such a one as this is a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, For as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And when Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck, and he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, Bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zephaniah Panan. And he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of that guy. I learned from the best. That guy. Priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old, and he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh, and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And in the 7 plenteous years the earth brought forth by handfuls. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. The food of the field which was round about every city laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, which that's the daughter of that guy, priest of On, bare unto him, Potiphar. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God said, He hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second called he Ephraim, for God had caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And the 7 years of plenteousness that was in the land of Egypt were ended, and the 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph had said, and the dearth was in all the land. But in all the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, Go unto Joseph, what he saith you do. And the famine was over all the face of the earth. And Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold them to the Egyptians. And the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. And all the countries came to Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that famine was so sore in all the earth. Now I was thinking here, that's kind of a good picture there. Pharaoh said, you need to go to Joseph if you need something. And he even said earlier in the verses that a man couldn't lift up his foot. He couldn't lift up his hand or foot without Joseph telling him what they could do. I thought about this in John chapter 3, verse 35. It says, The Father loveth the Son, and hath given all things into his hands. So, this is a good picture. That if you look at it, Pharaoh was like God in a sense. And then if Joseph was like Jesus, it's just like when Jesus came to earth, he said, he gave Christ all things into his hand. So we notice here that Joseph is a great picture of that. But looking here, I noticed that in, just like I said, in the years of the bad time, it would be completely forgotten about all the blessings. So you know what? They stored them up. They stored up their blessings. I was thinking about that. In our bad times in life, how often do we fully forget because we didn't store nothing up? We never built any storehouses. We never took the blessings. We forget about them because we didn't store them, anywhere. And then thinking about this, when he had them 2 kids, he named them. He said, For God hath said, He made me forget all my toil and in my father's house. In my father's house. So all this time, he knows his dream isn't completely done yet because his brothers hadn't bowed to him. I believe he still was holding on to that. He's like, when them 7-year bad years come, they're going to come. But just looking here, you notice this, that when it all was said and done, when he got the blessings of God, all the hardships, he said he forgot about them. So we notice here, and he was 17 when he started doing that, looking at his brother's evil report, he gets sold into slavery, and he's not 30. He's 30 whenever he's now here. So all that time in between, some was good, a lot of it was bad. But none of it was living his dream. Even the good parts wasn't his dream. But a lot of that was all in training in a sense. What Pharaoh just did said, you do everything. He'd already done that with Potiphar, so he's already had experience. Potiphar said, I didn't touch none of it. You do it all. He had experience with him. He had experience surveying in a sense and going around, telling his dad, his brother's reports. So he's already had that experience of looking at the land and looking at, okay, this is what they did. This is how many sheep we had. He said all this experience already that God was using in his life to get him ready for this point. And though he may have seen into, it looks like trials, then he was into prison. But what was he in the prison? He was over everyone in prison. So he's done everything. He's been in the prison, a prison guard, and over them. So he's done everything you could do to be ready for this. And God was getting him ready. And for sake of time, because I'm not going to read the rest of the chapters, but we kind of know the story here, so we'll skip ahead some. So, and the fact that this is one of my points, actually the dream found by God for the butler and the baker, this was a dream foretold by God. So this whole time, this dream for Pharaoh was also a dream that was foretold from the beginning. That kind of ends up happening in the Joseph's life. It was foretold long ago that he would have them to bow unto him. But the dream was never forgotten. You would think right now, okay, everything's good. I don't need to worry about nothing. So maybe the dream wasn't exactly how I thought it was. But no, God never forgot the dream he originally gave him. Right. So if we think just because something's really great in our life, we shouldn't stop there and be content. If God gave you a dream and you're like, well, this is really great. It's not what God wanted me to do exactly. But this is good thing. Don't stop there though, because God had more in it for him. So if we look at chapter, let's just skip all the way ahead. I'll just kind of summarize in the next couple of chapters. So they're starving basically, and his dad's like, well, you need to go buy some food. So they go the Pharaoh and they buy food from Pharaoh. And they leave, but not Pharaoh, from Joseph. And Joseph said, well, y'all are spies because you got so many of you. Pretty much relying into that because they're trying to say, no, we're all one father. But one with 11 sons, y'all are spies. Y'all are spies from Israel. Why are there so many of you? It's pretty much the premise of it. So they're like, no. And then originally he says he's going to send them, he was going to keep them all in prison, but one go. But 3 days later, he changed his mind and said, well, I'll let one of you stay here and the rest of you go. And they go back, and that's when he wouldn't let Reuben go back and get take Benjamin up there to see him to prove it. So they're just leaving their brother in prison, and none of them cared. It seemed like if they had enough food, they didn't know how long it was going to be. They didn't know it was going to be 7 years. Had they had Joseph, they'd have known, right? So they didn't know it was going to be 7 years. So they're like, well, we can just get by, and he'll be okay up there. There's food up there. So. Then it come to pass, Judah tells him, hey, if we'd have just left like we wanted to, we'd already been back this second time and had Simeon, and we'd all be good. So he finally lets them go, right? And they go back to Joseph, and Joseph keeps dealing with them and trying not to reveal himself too soon. He keeps crying and putting them out. So if we look here, let's see, in Genesis 45, and kind of get to the end of the story. And verse 1, after Judah is telling him all this stuff, hey, I can't, he sends them back. When they did bring Benjamin, he sends them back, and then he puts his chalice in Benjamin's sack, and he says, all right, he's going to be my slave forever, which he knew was his brother. He wanted him there, I believe. He's going to be a slave. Y'all go back to your father. And Judah spends a whole chapter 44 telling him why he can't do that, because it'll kill his father. And then in verse 1 of 45, then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him, and he cried, caused every man to go out from me. And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known to his brethren. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph, do my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. So they've already missed this in previous chapters that we didn't mention, that they're like, God's getting us now. See, they remembered all this guilt. They remember what they did to him. And they're like, oh, they didn't know it was him yet. And they're like, God's just punishing us for it. And Reuben's like, I told you not to do it. Half-hearted, like, I'm clean of this. But he didn't really try, did he? He had his own motives, secretly trying to do things instead of really helping his brother. But he's telling him, I told you not to do it. It's not my fault, you know. And then in verse 4, and Joseph said to his brethren, come near to me, I pray you. And they came near, and he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. They're probably thinking, yeah, we heard you the first time. They're like, you inching a little closer. You know, come closer. Yeah, we heard you. Because they think that he's going to kill him. So now, therefore, be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which thou shalt neither be earing nor harvest. So they bought enough food originally for 2 years. They didn't know it was going to be 7. They didn't know how to come back. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. And he hath made me a father to a Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout the land of Egypt. Haste ye, and go up to my father, and say to him, thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, tarry not. And thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou, thy children, and thy children's children, and thy flocks, and thy herds, and all that thou hast. And there will I nourish thee, for yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household, and all that thou come to poverty. And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that it is my mouth that speaketh to you. And just to summarize here, so we notice that when things finally got good, and he has his brothers there, in verse 14, and he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them, and after that his brethren talked with him. So when they saw that he really forgave them, then they could talk to him freely. But they had all that guilt and everything. So if you look at it to summarize the end of the lesson, though all that stuff great happened to Joseph, and he finally got what he wanted, and they were bound for him, you know, what they were buying food, bound for him, he didn't see it as something that they did to him. So if we keep our eyes on the dreams that God give us, and see the heartaches and the things that people do you wrong, see it as all as a stepping stones of what God has for your life, then you'll be able to forgive others. You can't forgive others if you're stuck in a situation. You can't forgive others if you're not having a vision. You know, the people perish. Why do people perish so much? Because all the bitterness, the hatred in their hearts. But if you keep your eyes on Christ, you can forgive when that day comes, when you're doing great and you got the blessings of God, and there's those naysayers and haters. You can forgive them because the whole time he saw it as something God wanted to do. And then for the brothers, they were able to get past it. They didn't stay holding on to it. So once he forgave them, you know, they talked with him. And I'm sure they talked peaceably this time. You know, they couldn't talk peaceably then. Now they could talk peaceably because they had all realized that it was really the will of God. And now God didn't make them be mean to him. He could have done it another way. I mean, I don't, you know, like you say, not Calvinists. I don't believe they were like they had to do it. God always has different ways. He just showed them the dream originally because God already knew. Like I said, he's all-knowing, but he's not going to force people to hate him or to love him. They had a free will. So God could have done it any way he chose. So in God's plan for our lives, which if we always keep in law, keep the vision, and do right, then the dream will come true.